Hello and welcome to Press TV Spotlight. I'm Marzieh Hashemi. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan have signed an agreement along with the U.S. president in Washington, D.C. On the surface, it may sound good that there will be peace between these two neighboring countries, but what else is it in this agreement, which is being called the Trump Corridor? And what role is the U.S. trying to play in the Caucasus? Iran's president says the transit corridor must serve as a route for peace and development, not achieving colonial objectives of foreign powers. We're going to be looking at this on the Spotlight. Let me welcome my guests to the program. Syed Mohsin Abbas, journalist and a political commentator out of London, and Reza Vedadi, academic, researcher, and author, also out of London. Well, thank you both for being with me. I'm start this off with Syed Mohsin. I mean, in your opinion, what are the goals of this Caucasus transit corridor for each of the parties involved, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the United States?
Well, clearly for the United States, they want to be the spoiler. It's a kind of spanner in the works for the international North-South trade corridor, which is a very vital development, which I think the Russians and the Iranians were certainly involved in. The Azerbaijanis are part of that corridor. The Armenians certainly were. And Iran and Russia have been working hard to try to start developing train routes. There are all sorts of projects which were evolving. And now for the Americans to come in and essentially say that they're going to try to establish what looks like a Western security presence immediately adjacent to the Iranian-Armenian border, that would be a huge interference within that trade link. But even more importantly, for the Islamic Republic of Iran, this announcement coming weeks after the Americans have openly bombed the Islamic Republic of Iran and have facilitated the Israeli attacks and invasions of the Islamic Republic. Clearly, this is a kind of a dangerous development for Iran, and it's sending a clear message that they're going to try to be even more belligerent in terms of encirclement of Iran, which exists already. I mean, the fact is American bases exist in Iraq. The Kurdish areas of Iraq are certainly in the north, are certainly a threat to the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's a threat in Balochistan on the eastern side, which is again funded organizations like Al Jundala, terrorist organizations, essentially ISIS, Khorasan, etc. They're also operating on those borders. There's of course still the threat in Afghanistan that is no friend of Iran's. So you can see that Iran is certainly being continually, encircled ever more tightly. And this is just another part of that, I think.
All right. Well, Reza, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has expressed his concern of foreign powers' involvement in the region. Your thoughts? Do you think Russia and Iran have reasons to be concerned?
Yes, I'd like to add to my colleague Syed Mohsin that initially, when I was researching this situation, I thought it's to do with the competition regarding bypassing Iran as a corridor, which joins the southern Asian continent and African countries to North Europe, Russia. But then the more I looked at it, I realized there's other corridors that are being planned, which is through Pakistan, Afghanistan to Tajikistan, and through Iraq, which is a big investment of $17 billion from the south of Iraq. They're building a massive port. They're taking it all the way up to Turkey, Europe. But that doesn't seem to concern the Iranian establishment as much as this one. And this one, as Syed Mohsin said, is not, I don't think it's just because of the trade, the corridor that will bypass Iran. The main issue is that it will bring America and its ally, Israel, and the European, basically NATO, at the doorstep of Iran. It will enable these countries to establish security posts, bases, military bases, spying bases, so they can spy on on Iran using the sophisticated intelligence service that they have. And so this is Iran's chance to work with Russia, because this is also a dangerous situation for Russia. If you remember, several years ago, Russia attacked Georgia because of situations like this where they were leaning towards the United States, and attacked Ukraine because of leaning towards NATO. So Russia doesn't want in its backyard a military base from the United States. And Iran definitely doesn't want it. So they need to collaborate with each other and China, because it will impact China as well, in preventing this from happening. And I think the key to doing it is, because nothing has been established yet, nothing has been formalized. This is just an agreement they had to work on this issue, is that Iran has to raise the stakes for these two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, to such an extent that they realize having this corridor would be detrimental to their national security.
Well, your thoughts, Syed Mohsin, have some interesting points made by Reza there. Do you see Russia and, as he said, even China working with Iran to prevent the increase in tensions in this region, or the establishment of perhaps U.S. or Western military troops? I mean, your thoughts on that?
The Russian response initially has been quite muted, surprisingly so, because it's the Russians who actually held sway in the Caucasus, and they are the dominant player. In fact, they brokered the deal which settled the recent war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Nagorno-Karabakh was kind of effectively annexed again by Azerbaijan. So the Russians were the ones who actually brokered the deal. The Turks have an influence with Azerbaijanis, no doubt. And the Turks, of course, are with NATO and with America on these issues. So there's more than one player involved, but certainly China and Russia both have a massive interest in it. The Chinese have what's called a middle corridor as well, because it also the trade routes are coming not just north-south, but there's also the routes from the east, which China would be concerned about. So I think what we are seeing is the US continuing its belligerent efforts to act as a breaker between the whole the trade Belt and Road trade networks. That's what America's objective is in West Asia. It's obviously trying its best to make sure neither Russia nor China nor Iran get a proper foothold there. And of course, the Caucasus is another region where now America clearly is beginning to make noises. It's not a small thing, the trade side of it, but I agree with Reza that actually the key thing that worries the Iranians now, and it worries them to the extent that the senior advisor to Ayatollah Khamenei, Mr. Akbar Ali Velayati, has made it clear that there will be no tolerance of some sort of American military presence which would dominate or cause problems between the Iranian and the Armenian borders, and they certainly won't tolerate their military presence. I think it's been hard enough for Iran to digest the fact that Mossad and Israel are very firmly embedded in Azerbaijan. They're firmly embedded also in the Kurdish regions of Iraq up in the north. These things are known, and in fact, the Iranians have fired ballistic missiles into the Kurdish territories for sure. And Azerbaijan is always a very tenuous relationship. Although the current president, Mr. Pezeshkian, is an Azeri himself, so he actually did visit, I think, Azerbaijan recently. So Iran has been doing its best to keep these regional neighbors neutral, at best, and friendly. But whether that is retained, given dollars coming in and Americans bribing and all sorts of other incentives given by the Israelis, one doesn't know whether these forces will stay neutral.
Right. Well, Reza, IRGC Deputy Commander for Political Affairs, Brigadier General Yadullah Javani, titled his speech or talk, "The Corridor Agreement as Aliyev and Pashinyan on Zelensky's Road to Misery." What do you think about this title, and what do you think he means by that?
Well, it's very interesting because when you do research, you find that Armenia's intelligence services, the foreign arm of it, was recently reformed and reestablished using CIA and British intelligence. So this is 2023, 2024. And Azerbaijan has a close relationship with the UK through its BP selling oil and investment through BP and its other interactions it has with the United Kingdom. And so if this corridor takes effect and it becomes managed by the United States, but then will become a security risk to Iran, Iran will have no choice but to use military force to prevent this from happening. and this could lead to a broader conflict between Azerbaijan and Iran, same as Ukraine, showing interest in joining the NATO alliance, which forced the Russians to invade that part that it has invaded now and taken over, and the war that we see for the past 2 years. So I think Iranians, as I said, the only way from preventing this from taking shape will have to show that there will be great consequences for the Azerbaijanis if they plan to take this forward. And Iran should not back down. If it backs down, unfortunately, what will happen is the US-Israeli NATO alliance will use it as a measure to progress its agenda of destabilizing that part of Iran, because they want to join the north of Azerbaijani provinces with the Azerbaijan of Baku and cause Kurdistan to separate and Baluchistan. So it's a strategy that's unfolding. And also, which we can discuss maybe a little bit later, is the David Corridor, which will link Israel through southern Syria all the way up to the north of Iraq and towards that corridor.
Yeah, lots of plans in the region. Syed Mohsin, I mean, you have to give it to the United States and Israel that they continually plan, even though right now they're in the middle of a genocide and so many other things. We see this trying to take shape. I want to look at this because Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, in a phone call to the Armenian leader, has said Iran has no problem and is happy if two neighboring countries can come together as far as a peace agreement. However, Iran will not tolerate the involvement of foreign military and security forces. Iran is making that quite clear to both countries. Your thoughts? Would the United States at this point in time push it to that level with this corridor, as it's also being called the Trump corridor, being established and actually putting American troops right there?
Well, Israel wants American troops in Gaza. Israel forces America to come in to directly bomb Iran. What Israel wants, it tends to get. It seems the Zionist lobby does get its way. So we've got every evidence to suggest that if the Americans and if the Israelis actually want the Americans to do this, they'll do it, and they'll certainly try. The reality of the matter is that if you go with the scenario, which I think is very likely, that Israel will attack Iran again, they will try to invade Iran, they can't do anything on the ground, Mercy. So, how are you supposed to subjugate Iran or even create regime change, that lovely thing that they enjoy trying to do for all these years? How would you do it without a land force? Now, the thing is, you've got to look also the fact that the Turks and the Israelis and the Americans have been now working with the PKK, making new relations and actually weaponizing the PKK. And it's indicated that the PKK may be a force which was used against Iran. The same thing goes in Azerbaijan. They've got their talents inside Azerbaijan. It's very easy, I think, for American bases and Israeli bases which exist there. Now, there are huge indications that they actually exist and would be used if necessary. The Kurds are sitting there waiting. And as Reza mentioned, the Balochistan region from Pakistan isn't far from stable. It's also infiltrated, and the Taliban are no friends of the Islamic Republic either. So really, Iran has to show huge, I think, intent of force to not allow this encirclement to happen. The old days, of course, what Haji Qasem Soleimani had done, Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani had done, was go on this hybrid asymmetric regional offensive. And I think that is justified now. The more you look at the way Israel and America will try to encroach in order to get that land invasion element, they got aerial power, but the land invasion would have to happen from these ethnic groups that they might be able to stir up. That's what their aim is. That's what they're going to try and do, I think, is they're going to try to find any dissident forces, any insurgency that they can get people to commit to. They will throw huge amounts of money. You saw it in Syria, and they're belligerent about it. And balkanization of Libya, balkanization of Syria, I think is the way that they may want to go with Iran. The idea of balkanizing Iran, reducing its borders, weakening the government by taking away a lot of its kind of provinces may well be the other strategy that they've now decided to embark upon, rather than commit American troops and soldiers themselves, which they don't have enough of and wouldn't do, and nor the Israelis got that sort of force. It's only by instigating trouble with the neighbors of Iran, I think, that they could get any viable land invasion or an uprooting of the Iranian stability via a ground military offensive of some kind, or insurgencies at least.
Well, Reza, the IRGC has referenced the mistake that Ukraine made in expanding towards Russian territory, basically in allowing, obviously, NATO to get closer to Russian territory, and compared this action to what is happening in the Caucasus. Your thoughts about that? Are these two situations comparable?
In some ways it is, because Azerbaijan, until only about a century or so ago, even Armenia all the way up to Georgia, was part of the Iranian Empire. And it was during the Turkmenchai Treaty that Iran lost these regions. And that's why we have so many Armenian Christians in Iran, because it was part of the Iranian society from going back, several hundred years. And so Azerbaijan is in many ways part of Iran. They try to say that the north of Iran is part of Azerbaijan, but there was no Azerbaijan 150 years ago. It was a province within Iran. And so if war happens, which we all hope that doesn't happen, many Azerbaijanis will have had enough of the central government in Baku. Because even though Azerbaijan has a lot of investment in its oil and creating a lot of wealth, unfortunately, Aliyev Ilham, the president of Azerbaijan, is like the previous Shah of Iran. He holds the wealth from the oil sales for himself and a small group around him. Many Azerbaijanis live in poverty. Many Azerbaijanis are not able to practice political freedom. Many Azerbaijanis are not able to practice religious freedom. Even though Azerbaijan is predominantly a 12 Shia faith country, they're not allowed to mourn for Imam Hussein. We're in the month of Safar now, the holy month of Safar, building up to the Arba'in. They're not allowed to demonstrate any religious symbolisms and mourning for Imam Hussein. So I think a lot of Azerbaijanis, about 10 million population that they have, a lot of them will not be sympathetic of the Baku government and may side with Iran or Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is in Iran. So the same thing that happened in Ukraine, a large part of it is Russian-speaking, Russian cultured. And so they were happy to be integrated into the greater Russian Republic. So this is something that will have possibly happen to Azerbaijan. And that's something that I think the leadership in Baku needs to really think about before they venture and try to do something dangerous.
Interesting point. What about that, Syed Mohsin? I mean, as Reza said, the majority of the population in Azerbaijan is actually Shia. However, the government is very secular and clamps down very hard on certain Islamic practices. Your thoughts about what Reza has said, the possibility of actually a big part of the population there siding with Iran if a conflict was to take place?
Well, I personally know people who are, political prisoners of conscience, and they've been tortured, and they're basically being subjugated. It is by force that Aliyev is keeping a vast number of the Azerbaijani population under control. And Reza is absolutely right. It's with the power of the oil money that he keeps the mafia and the totalitarian mechanism around him suppressing the Azeris. And it would be certainly something which should be explored. I think the Iranians have been really nice to the Azeris. I think the policy generally of Ayatollah Rouhani and all the other Iranian leaderships and governments has been one of trying to persuade the Azerbaijanis to remain friends. They've had a very fraternal effort. And the Iranians, to be fair to them, have done that to all of their neighbors. They put the Hope Initiative out there, trying to get people together. They've tried to create good relations, trade relations with all their neighbors. there comes a point where you have to think very carefully. If the intelligence that is coming back says that Azerbaijan is participating directly in collaboration with the Zionists and Israel and America to undermine Iranian security, then at some point you have to make a real decision and say, stop playing Mr. Nice Guy, stop playing the soft angle, and maybe what you need to do is support some of those dissident groups, because that's the tactic which the Israelis and the Americans use with Iran, isn't it? That's exactly what's done. So what stops the Islamic Republic of Iran supporting the oppressed in Azerbaijan? If our commitment is to support the oppressed around the world, then that ought to be a uniform support, I personally believe. And I think that the Azerbaijanis, especially the Shia fraternity who were there, were being suppressed and oppressed and tortured and murdered. They may well need some support, and that might also work in the interests of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Sometimes it's quite good if an enemy of yours or somebody who's playing hypocritical games and allowing other enemies arrive at your doorsteps. Sometimes you need to go into their homes and perhaps give them something to think about before they set fire to yours.
Mm. Well, what about that? I mean, Reza, Armenia has 3 million people population, Azerbaijan 10 million. Are they being pushed into this by Washington because increasing the possibility of themselves being used as pawns in the middle of this and possibly being dragged into a war with neighboring countries? I mean, your thoughts about that?
I mean, 100%. The prime minister or president of Armenia is not very popular at the moment. There's big pushback against his idea of giving the Syunik Corridor so that Azerbaijan or America could come take and use it. So there's a big pushback from that regarding sovereignty. And so he's clearly, I don't know if he's being pushed, bullied, blackmailed, or whatever, but he's playing, he's a pawn in the game of the great powers. And same for Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan doesn't have its own strong military. It gets a lot of equipment from the West and from Israel. The only thing really it has going for it is the oil they exports. So it's also, and the president has been on the side, unfortunately, for the past 20 years that he's been in power. His father was in power, so it's some kind of hereditary presidency, has been on the side of the Western Bloc. And so Turkey also has a big hand in this. Turkey acts in two ways. Once it says that it against the genocide in in Palestine. However, then it's supplying one of the biggest exporters and suppliers of Israeli commodities, oil and other food and other things that it needs. And it takes the oil from Azerbaijan and gives it to Israel. So these countries are all acting pawns for the bigger countries and bigger powers, such as the United States and NATO and Turkey. So they need to be careful, because the price of lack of independence could lead to destruction. Sometimes independence may have its own costs, such as Iran is paying, but that cost is much smaller than compared to having no independence and being completely ruled by outside powers. And we see this in Ukraine. We've seen what's happened to Ukraine. 20-25% of land has been lost. Its youth, its young men have been completely devastated. Millions have been killed. Millions have left the country. That country is in the ruins. It will take 100 years for that country to get back to any kind of normalcy. So I would say to Armenians and Azerbaijanis, be careful, because you don't want to be in the same situation as the Ukrainians.
Right. And Syed Mohsin, final thoughts. I mean, where do you see the end game in this? Where is this going in your perspective?
Well, I think Israel is planning a war on Iran. I think the Americans will get dragged into it to whatever extent. I think they are very possibly looking at these outlying areas around Iran as means of being able to penetrate and cause trouble and to ideally balkanize Iran. And Iran has to make a very firm policy, a very firm defensive strategy to spoil that plan. If Iran sits and waits, rather like what happened in Syria, if we all wait around for the plans of the Israelis and the Zionist imperialists to unfold, whilst doing nothing to intervene, then that will be something that will have been brought upon itself by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there has to be more than diplomacy. There has to be some really serious military consequence that has to be outlined to the Azeris and the Armenians so that they stop the direction they're going. And in fact, the Russians and the Chinese in particular need to get more serious, because if you're constantly going to have a posture which is just allowing colonialism, imperialism to expand its borders, to expand its influence without pushing back, then that's a problem. And I think that Russia and China need to think much more seriously about the alliance with the Islamic Republic of Iran and actually do many, many more practical defense strategies.
All right. And on that note, I thank both of you for being with me. Syed Mohsin Abbas, journalist and political commentator out of London. Reza Vedadi, academic researcher and author, also out of London. And thank you, viewers, for being with us on another Spotlight. I'm Marzia Hashemi. Hope to see you right here next time. Goodbye.